Welcome back. We've had a few weeks off why I haven't been putting up any of these videos for you. The theme 1 paper is now done. So now we're moving on to paper 2. So looking at the first part of theme 2, we're looking at 2.1, which was growing the business. So this video is going to focus on business growth, changes in business aims and objectives, business and globalisation, ethics, the environment and business. So ultimately, these were types of ideas that were all raised in the first theme, but it goes into a little bit more depth as we move along. These videos are going to aim to be a little bit shorter as they progress because this is more recent content. So we're going to really focus on the terminology and a reminder of what these topics covered. This first one, 2.1, was done for most of you last year. So 2.1.1 is business growth. So key terminology here is organic growth. So this is internal growth, or organic growth is when a business grows by expanding its own activities. The idea is that they, produce more products and things like that. They keep advertising, they grow their customer base and things like that. That's organic growth. It's just growing naturally as they move. So business growth is often an important business objective because it may help to increase market share, it improves the profits, it increases revenue, it helps a business to open more branches. So that might be, you might start with a clothing brand, they start with one store, they then open another store, another store, another store, and then they've got 600 stores. That's all been organic growth. Business growth can occur in a number of ways. So it increases through increasing sales, opening more shops, employing more staff, entering new markets and developing new products. So business growth can occur in a number of ways. So we talked about the sales. So increased sales leads to increased revenue because revenue is the amount of sales times the price. So opening more shops, we've talked about, it's just expanding more, new locations and so forth, employing more staff. Obviously, you have more staff, more shops, then you need to have more staff. So entering new markets. So this is when we talk about if a business wants to expand, they go into an overseas market. This is what we talk about, entering new markets. Also changing its marketing mix. So we talk about the 4 Ps in 1.4. This is around how they focus on how they approach new people. So it might be in the same market, so it might be in the same location, but you might be targeting a different market segment. So, we've talked about age, gender, income. So you might have had appealing to sort of a low-level income market, and then you might develop a high-quality product that might be more expensive, but you might target at people with more money. So taking advantage of technology, E and M commerce. So for a lot of businesses, they've gone online and found new ways to reach new audiences through the online platforms. So developing new products, that's like research and development, innovation and improvement. So the example I've got here is new flavors. So a lot of these ice cream companies, they come up with new flavors as a way to just have more products to service, to attract more customers. So we've talked about organic growth. Now we talk about external growth. So inorganic growth is when a firm merges with another company or they purchase the business. So this is where we start to hear types of mergers, takeovers and risk. Expensive. So mergers is exactly what it means, is 2 companies literally coming together, and a takeover is literally when one buys another company out and they choose how to run that business. They are risky, they are expensive. So takeover, one business buys another one. The official definition is when an existing company expands by buying more than half the shares of another firm. So obviously, if they own more than half of the other company, they have the controlling part of that company. So the manager of the dominant business will be in control, and this form of external growth can be hostile. And what we mean by hostile is it means that if you've got someone, literally you've built this company that that you've spent years doing, and then all of a sudden someone comes in that bought more than half the shares of your company and they start to tell you how to run your company because they have the controlling party. So this can be what skills people need, what technology they use, how it affects their customers. We've got economies of scale. So a merger occurs when 2 businesses join to form a new but larger business under joint ownership. So that's 2 companies literally coming together and deciding how that they want it to work together. So the managers of both businesses will make decisions together. Now, a merger can be quite hostile as well, but the objective is that they are equal parties in it and they will decide together how the business should work moving forwards. Benefits of mergers is you're pooling ownership, skills, resources, and can help obviously grow a business. Sometimes you need more resources together to build more success within that market. Oh, here, advantages of merging. Economies of scale, so better deals because of increased order size, bulk buying discounts. So what we basically mean is that if you've got more money, so if you're in a retail fashion business, if you've got more people working together, you can spend a lot more money to get a bigger discount. So when you see at the shops, buy two, get one half price, that same idea. So if people are buying more and more products, they can get better discounts for buying more items. So they can do that obviously with a bigger pool of resources. So increased revenue and market share, increases size, combined company increases market power and ability to set higher prices. So if they've got more of the market together, they can control more of that market behavior. In buying technology, sometimes it's simply impossible for a company to create the technology it needs to sustain its growth. It can be a lot simpler to buy it. So when you're merging, you've got more resources that both companies can buy the same technology and benefit from it together. And international expansion. So buying a business in another country helps with culture issues and foreign laws. So what that means, if you're expanding your business, you buy a business in another company that has a different culture, you've got people who will be local there, who will have the local infrastructure legally, who will also be able to inform the business of ways that what the business can do in order to not offend their local customers and things like that. So that's also a benefit of growing the business that way. Disadvantages of merging is clash of cultures. So all businesses have a slightly different culture and they may not work well together. Possible communication problems as the business gets bigger, or if there are now too many employees. What was working before in a smaller organisation, the information flow may not always be so smooth. Unreliable merger partners. So a good merger will depend on trust between the businesses, but if people don't trust the people who you're merging with, you might run into a few issues. Diseconomies of scale. So as a business gets larger, costs will go up, and that can create problems for motivation, communication, and coordination. So 80% of all mergers fail. Because remember, this is two businesses coming together, everyone works together. What you probably see more success in is when there's a takeover, but that is generally quite hostile. So mergers don't always work so well. All right, so let's go for a practice question. Discuss the impact of growing internally. So this is a 6-marker. So pause the video here. So we know that structure for 6 markers should have 2 BLTs. And because we've got to discuss the impact, look of a positive impact and look of a negative impact. Pause the video here. And for the rest of us, let's move on. So economies of scale. So as a firm gets bigger, the cost of producing each item reduces. So that's the whole idea. If we look at what all of your fixed and variable costs are for each item, the more you produce, because your fixed costs don't change generally, they become, if you divide them up for your fixed costs, how many items that you've produced, that cost is going to go down. So obviously the variable cost will stay the same as, for each item, but your fixed cost will go down. So that's the idea of economies of scale. It becomes cheaper overall to produce each item because you can produce more and you've got some costs that are not going to increase. So for managerial, bulk buying, technological, financial. Diseconomies of scale, when a business gets too big and the cost of producing a product increases. So when we talk about like that, so for example, if you don't need to, you've got a factory that you've got there, once you're working to capacity, if you can't produce any more items, but you want to produce more, you might have to buy a newer factory, which could make the whole process become more expensive. So that's where the business has gotten too big, the cost now goes up. So all of a sudden it becomes expensive again to produce each item. So the question is whether you want to keep growing the business, whether it's the benefits will outweigh the disadvantages. This kind of scale can come in relation to communication, decision-making, motivation, added complexity. Basically what that is what happens is as the business is getting too big, these are where your errors start to become, because things are getting too big, where the costs for all of these things become too great for the business. So this is where we talk why it falls under diseconomies of scale. All right, a PLC, this is where we first formally look at it in the content. So public limited company. So this is a company that sells shares to the public through the stock exchange. We've got PLC. The other one was LTD, which was a private limited company. And that's where shares of the company are sold generally to friends and family, which we talked about, I think it was in 1.4. So a PLC is owned by the shareholders from the stock exchange. So as the business grows, it may change the type of its ownership to a public limited company. Public limited companies has PLC after its name. So that is how you know the difference. So public limited companies will have PLC, private limited companies will have LTD. What does a private limited company have? A PLC must have issued at least £50,000 worth of shares. A PLC can sell shares to the general public, and a PLC can be listed on the stock exchange. So it's directed by the board. So there is a board representing the shareholders to help make decisions. It's managed by the managers in the company, and anyone can buy shares. So two benefits to the shareholder of buying shares. The value of the share increases. So the idea is when you put money in, over time, that business keeps performing and that share becomes worth more each share. And the company pays a dividend each year, so it's a share of the profit. So once, we've looked at the end of the year, so you think about on your profit and loss statement, you get to what your net profits are. Your net profit is then divided up by each of the shares issued, and each owner is paid a portion of that share based on how many shares that they have. So sometimes it may not be very much per share, but if you own a large share of the company, you're going to get a big sum of money as the dividend for that profit. So what are the benefits to the company? So flotation. So that occurs when an organisation makes an offer of shares to the public. So initial public offering, which is also referred to as an IPO. When we talk about flotation, it's on the stock market and allows access to a larger pool of finance. PLCs tend to be large, stable companies, meaning it's easier to access further finance from banks. Enhanced reputation of the company due to its PLC status. So generally companies that people know on the stock exchange are generally recognised, at least domestically or even globally, and the company gains exposure through the stock exchange. So what are some of the drawbacks to the company? The divorce of ownership and control means that the owners of the business, the shareholders, might be different than those who control it, so the board of directors. Flotation is an expensive process and not guaranteed to be successful. So you might go public with your company, but if no one buys it, it's been a very expensive process and your shares aren't worth very much. The general public can buy shares, meaning that the company is open to takeovers. So if someone buys more than 50% of the shares of your company, they have the controlling share of that company. Financial information is freely available for anyone to see, including competitors. So when you have things listed publicly, you have to provide all of your financial information. You can't hide anything. And there are stricter rules and regulations that are placed on public limited companies. So advantages is limited liability. It's easier to raise money. Banks are more willing to lend to more established companies, and it's easier to grow and expand. Disadvantages are it's expensive to achieve. So before you can become a public limited company, you have to have already been quite successful. You've got to publish all of your accounts. There's more information available for all to see. So all of your competitors can see your financial information and how you're running that company. So internal. So retained profit is profit obviously kept within the business from profit after tax to help finance future activity. Profit will either be retained or distributed as dividends. A business with an objective of growth is likely to want to maximise retained profit without upsetting shareholders. So shareholders will still want to receive a dividend, but obviously you want to keep some of your retained profits to help grow that business. So that's why we're talking about it in this topic. As the business, so we started talking about it as a source of finance. And this is now when it gets used more strategically. As the business is established, there is likely to be a larger amount of retained profit available for expansion. Often growing businesses will not pay dividends. choosing to plough through all retained profit back into the company. But generally, shareholders will need to know that that's what the strategy is, and hopefully what the idea for them is that their shares will grow in price even though they're not getting a dividend. All right, so selling assets. So an asset is something that is owned by a business, so it could be a vehicle, land, or machinery. A business can sell off assets that it no longer requires to get an immediate injection of cash into a business and thereby providing finance. So we talked about this again as in 1.3 in sources of finance. You can sell off your assets to gain if you need money. It's obviously you've only got a limited amount depending on how many assets you have, but this is why when you've got assets in a business that is no longer making you money, your best interest is trying to sell it to at least salvage as much money of that as possible. So alternatively, you may choose to sell off an asset and then lease it back. So that sometimes people can own their own cars. They can actually sell their car and lease it off a company. So they rent the car from the lease company. That's something that people can do. It provides immediate one-off cash injection into the business. Current assets are items that are owned that can be sold off in the short run within a year. Sale of assets refers to more to the sale of a long-term or fixed asset, so more than a year. So we talk about short-term assets and long-term assets, or current assets and long-term assets. So long-term assets are things like land, cars, and things like that you're more likely to have for more than a year. And your current assets might be things like stock. So when you buy stock, you plan to sell it quite quickly anyway, because that's part of your business. So that's how it would be considered a current asset. So we now talk about externals. So loan capital. So is a set amount of money borrowed, which is mainly from a bank, normally for a specific purpose to be paid back over a period of time. So e.g., you might take a loan out for 3 years with a fixed interest rate of 4% of the initial sum on a yearly basis. Interest has to be paid off on the amount borrowed. Banks may require security on the loan, known as collateral. So this can be an asset of the company. So it might be premises or a factory. So something to secure the loan that the bank can literally come in and take if you don't pay back your loan. Financial institutions such as banks play a vital role in providing capital for businesses to expand. Other external factors here is share capital, including stock market flotation, just discussed before. Shares represent ownership of a company. If you hold one share worth £1 in a multi-billion company, then you are a part owner. The business will lose some control after selling off shares that it currently owns. Shareholders will receive a dividend, so we talked about before, a share of the profits, and be given a voting right, 1 vote per share. The amount of dividend payable will vary year on year and depend upon profit levels and the company objectives. It's a good source for raising large amounts of finance, and it's only an option for companies. So if you're a sole trader or you are in a partnership, you cannot sell off shares of your company to raise money. You have to go through more traditional forms of generating sources of finance. All right. So let's practice questions. So discuss the impact on a business of financing growth using loan capital. So discuss the impact on a business of financing growth using loan capital. So generally looking for positive and a negative for a discuss question. We're looking for 2 BLTs here. Pause the video here. For the rest of us, let's keep going. All right, moving on to 2.1.2, changes in business aims and objectives. So remember, we started talking about aims in 1.3. So aim is a long-term vision of a company. So increase market share or increase profit. And objective is the small steps involved in achieving the aim. So the objective might be to put up the price by 10%. So your aim is the overarching where you want the company to go, and the objects are like the little stages that you're going to do, what you're going to do to reach your aim. So business aims and objectives change as businesses evolve. So there's a focus on survival or growth. So a new business might want to survive. Once you are an established business, you want to keep growing that business. That might be growing customers, growing sale numbers, growing amount per sale, growing market share. So entering or exiting markets. So it might be around trying to be recognised nationally, or you might be looking to go international with your brand. Growing or reducing the workforce. So sometimes it might be you want to keep making the same money but have less employee overheads, or you might want to have more staff in more places. Increasing or decreasing the product range. You might choose to have fewer products but specialise in something, or you might choose to be a brand that kind of has a hand in lots of parts. So just thinking about Primark, they've got like homewares, kitchenwares, childrenwares, menswear, sleepwear, sportswear. You know, they have so many areas, whereas you've got some boutique fashion stores or some stores that just specialize just with activewear. So things like that might be part of your aims and objectives of how you change your business. And that obviously depends on who your customers are and the way the market is moving. So focusing on survival or growth. So new and existing businesses rarely want to stand still and simply keep the position they have in a market. Instead, they are likely to focus on either survival or growth. The two types of businesses primarily focus on survival: new businesses in their first year of operation, or established businesses under threat. So for example, from their competitors. So however, over time, as a business becomes more recognised and achieves a secure position in the market, it may change its aims and objectives to focus on growth. So no, established businesses in a very competitive environment may be forced back to survival, being their main aim. So this could be due to low sales, increasing competition, changes in trends and tastes, poor economic performance, or an overall change in market conditions. So entering or exiting markets, a common growth strategy for businesses is to enter new markets, so different age group or gender, or customers in another country. The aim of entering new markets is to grow the business overall, develop a new target market, and ultimately grow the business's market share across multiple markets. For example, this would be like a women's fashion retailer introducing a range of men's clothing. Businesses also occasionally exit markets. They do this for a number of reasons. For example, a shrinking market, poor performance of the business product, a new market opening up, or the business failing overall. So, for example, I used to work for a big corporate conglomerate in Australia. They were trying to compete with their biggest rival, and in those rivals, they had hardware brands, discount retail brands, supermarket brands, and so forth. So one tried to rival Australia's biggest hardware retailer with another huge hardware retailer megastore. But because of the competition, they couldn't get enough customers away, and that business started to fail. So all of a sudden, they invested billions into growing this part of the market. Then they started focusing on survival, and then they realized they had to close their business. They couldn't compete with the biggest competitor. So little things like that. So people are changing their aims and their objectives as they move through. So growing or reducing the workforce. When a business is expanding and performing well, some of its aims and objectives may focus on growing its workforce. This may include opening new departments, creating new teams, recruiting more staff. By growing its workforce, a business gains more potential for expansion. Reducing the workforce is usually part of a survival strategy for a business. When a business is not performing well or is exiting a market, it may reduce its workforce to help reduce its overall business costs. This is when we talked about during times of economic downturn, things like that, they might make some departments redundant. So if they produce a certain type of product, they might stop producing that product, and all the people involved in that product might become out of a job. That type of thing. And then obviously in reverse, if you're trying to develop a new product, you might hire people specifically to work on that product. However, occasionally a reduction in a workforce is part of a business growth plan involving technology. For example, in the banking industry, many high street branches have closed due to the huge increase in the use of online banking and automated cash machines. So that means they obviously don't need as many people working in branches because people are doing a lot more online. So increasing or decreasing a product range. Businesses often start with a small number of products, but over time they may expand their product range as they grow. For example, a technology business could begin by making a range of computers, but over time it could expand into developing mobile phones and televisions. Having a larger product portfolio allows businesses to manage their risk, because if a product is not performing well, the business can rely on its other products to produce revenue. When a product is not generating enough revenue or a business is failing, the business will often decrease its products range. Usually, a business will do this either to allow them to focus on their existing products or to develop a new product range in a different sector. So, practice questions. Explain one reason why the performance of a business can impact its aims and objectives. So, this is just a 1BLT. Explain one reason why the performance of a business can impact its aims and objectives. You can pause the video here. Let's keep going. 2.1.3, business and globalisation. So gross domestic product, GDP. So we talk about this a lot. We started talking about this in 1.5 when we started looking at economic factors as well. It is the total monetary or market value of all the finished goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific time period. It is a measure of the size and health of a country's economy over a period of time. So globalisation looks at the manner in which the world is becoming increasingly connected as a result of trade and working practices. Globalisation has resulted in a greater dependence on global trade, an increase in the number of transnational companies, more movement of employees, goods and services between countries. So globalisation has meant increased competition from overseas for UK businesses. This comes at the expense of domestic businesses. So demand will fall for UK goods and services. What we're seeing here is that a lot of businesses here, instead of having something produced in the UK, can have it produced cheaper internationally and then brought into the UK. So that is damaging our UK producers. So this is particularly the case for low-cost imports such as textiles. Don't worry about the question here, but that's what we're obviously seeing. So people are looking externally to bring stuff cheaper to the UK to make it cheaper for the overall UK public. But obviously this then comes at a cost of jobs and votes in the UK for UK people. So imports. So how do we benefit from trade? So imports is obviously when we're bringing things into the country. So however, UK businesses will benefit by buying imports from overseas and selling them onto UK consumers. This could be in the form of finished goods, semi-manufactured goods and raw materials. So UK businesses profit by adding value. So for example, supermarkets make it easy and convenient to buy foreign produced fruits and vegetables. Car manufacturers import components for producing cars in the UK. So you might have a UK produced car, but it might get parts from other parts. It might buy parts from other areas in Europe, which they might buy quite cheap. But then because of their skill in the UK, they build the car here and they can still charge a premium price because it's still a UK produced vehicle. So this is export. So this is people who make things in the UK and export it to other countries. So how do we benefit from trade? UK businesses compete internationally, selling to overseas markets by offering better designs, so innovative products, well-respected Western brands and luxury brands, higher quality products, so high levels of quality control in the UK, high added value, and use of advanced technologies. So in financial services, UK has a world reputation for its financial services, and we can access foreign markets. So things that we do here in the UK helps economies and so forth in other countries as well. So remember, services can also be a product, so that's for importing and exporting too. So inward and outward investment. So UK businesses establishing a branch or subsidiary abroad or foreign businesses locating in the UK. So for example, the UK car industry has benefited from this. Despite being the second biggest car producer in Europe, there are no large UK-owned car manufacturers. So what are the problems of trade for UK companies? The changing business locations has seen many UK businesses relocate abroad, so particularly for manufacturing. So this means we've been closing down factories and so forth in the UK to benefit from cheaper resources abroad, like labour and materials. So some businesses have moved closer to large markets like China, and they're producing their goods there. And outsourcing abroad is closing down UK facilities and using the services of a third party located overseas. So for example, call centres. So a lot of call centres in the UK closed down and they set up the call centre in India. So the businesses here can benefit from cheaper resources or more skilled employees doing the same job cheaper in another location. Obviously, this is in relation to global competition. So you struggle to compete on cost for manufactured goods as wage rates in UK are high compared to a lot of other countries. So obviously, if your wages are high, it makes it more expensive to produce things. And obviously, the UK is subject to international laws of trade. So obviously, if things are being produced in cheaper locations, it will reduce the cost to produce those items. So international trade, imports and exports. So money and goods. So remember, imports is money leaving the country. Do I have this here? Yeah, there you go. Goods coming in, money going out is your imports. And exports is money coming in, but the goods going out. So that's the difference there with imports and export. Just remembering the way the money flows and the way the goods flow is really important if you get any questions on this, because you are likely to see things about imports and exports, because it's a big part of the business of the business world today. I would imagine you are likely to see these on paper 2. So an export, when a business sells goods to a consumer in a foreign country. Import, when a customer buys goods that were produced in a foreign country. So if in doubt, it's always useful to think about which way the money flows, like in the slide that I showed you before. Exports cause money to flow into an economy. Imports cause money to flow out of an economy. So here are just a few examples. A British person buys a Korean-made TV, would be an import. So the goods are coming in, the money's going out. A French person buys a British computer game. That is an export. So the goods are leaving the UK, the money's coming into the UK. A British shop buys toys to sell in the UK from a Chinese business. That's an import, because the British shop is bringing the goods into the country. The money is going to the Chinese business out of the country. All right, you get the idea. Have a look at those. Just make sure that you are familiar so you can recognise which way you're talking about it for imports and exports, so you can answer those questions. And there's the answers there. Okay, explain one benefit to UK businesses from the rise in the number of imports entering the UK. This is one BLT, so you're thinking of one benefit to UK businesses from the rise in the number of imports entering the UK. Pause your video here, and let's continue. So outsourcing. So why do businesses trade? Outsourcing increased access to customers, access to a wider range of goods and materials, differences in technology, differences in resource endowments, provide comparable goods at less expensive prices, promotes growth and wealth, and creates wealth and opportunity. So this is why businesses are doing trade. So definition. So this came up on your mock exam. Really good to be clear on this to make sure that you do get the marks if you do get a question on this. So a multinational company, so MNCs, is a large company that operates in many countries. So you generally need to talk about it being a business that is operating in various countries. You can always give examples. So for example, Tesco has stores in 13 countries here. You need to be really clear in your definitions. Obviously, you don't need, your definitions don't need to be long. If it's a 1-mark question, it needs to be brief, but it needs to be more, it needs to not be vague. So you need to show the examiners that you know what you're talking about. So multinational businesses operate in more than one country. They operate in a number of major global markets: North American, European Union, Southeast Asia. Many are recognisable global brands like Coke and McDonald's. The impact of globalisation on businesses, so multinationals. So advantages are global brand recognition, wider market, economies of scale, easier to compete internationally if located in other countries, take advantage of lower production costs, possible tax advantages or grants, and you can spread the risk. Disadvantages of multinationals is communication and coordination problems, threat of political unrest, differences in culture and legal systems, media attention may be seen as unethical, vulnerable in fluctuations in exchange rates. So what a lot of those means, obviously there's a different, you're operating in so many different markets. So something like McDonald's, for example, in India, because cows are generally regarded as sacred animals in India, and most McDonald's products traditionally are beef products. In India, they don't have a lot of beef products. I do believe that they still have some things on the menu. But there's a lot more chicken and vegetarian options because that services their local market. That's aside from what the customers want. Culturally, it would be really bad form for McDonald's to just focus on beef products because it would offend a lot of people in India. So little things like that, but also with the changes in legal systems and the exchange rates, especially if a company is working all around the world, depending on how the exchange rate is going up and down in different countries, it's going to have an effect on their profits and revenues and so forth. So 2 ways a country can reduce imports. So tariff is one. So a tariff is a tax that is placed on imported goods. The tariff increases the price of imports, and this reduces the demand. So that is what a country, so the government might put a tariff on a product. So that basically, so it's on top of it, so the company doesn't really get a say about it. So it might be a type of tax, and that with that tax, they can often, try and help local businesses and so forth. But especially if people are importing goods that are so much cheaper and it's damaging, domestic producers, the government might put the tariffs if you have to pay an extra tax for those goods, and some people may not actually want to buy it if they've got to pay that extra tariff onto that product. Or some people will just choose to pay it, but that can affect the demand. The other thing is a quota. So that's a limit placed on the number of imports allowed into a country. So sometimes it might be, some countries have car quotas. So especially if it's a company that produces a lot of cars themselves, they might have a limit on how many cars they can bring in to help stimulate their car producing industry in that country. So barriers to international trade. So a trade bloc is when a group of countries join together to reduce barriers to trade. So this makes trade between them easier and cheaper, increasing demand. So the EU is actually a trade bloc or a trading bloc. So when Britain came out of the EU, so with Brexit, this is why we now have to pay tariffs and things like that. We now have extra taxes that we need to pay on goods that we get from Europe. So when Britain was part of the trade bloc, we didn't have to pay as many of these taxes and things like that. And there was much more free trade between the countries. Whereas now we're seeing the changes, and this is also what's impacting inflation. So this is, if you think of trade bloc and you think of the EU, now that we're out of there, obviously we've got to pay more taxes and tariffs and things like that for a lot of those goods. So however, countries outside the trading bloc will face barriers to trade, making it more difficult for businesses to sell their product. There are a number of trade blocs around the world. So the UK was a member of the European Union. NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement, is made up of the USA, Canada, and Mexico, and ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. They're all examples of trading blocs. So all areas of business are included. So technology is used in many of these areas. So you can use technology in marketing, in sales, in finance, in production, in distribution, and in human resources. There's always new softwares coming out to help businesses run their businesses better, to make it more efficient. So this is an Amazon warehouse. So how does Amazon benefit from not having a high street store? So ultimately, they benefit because they use through the internet. They can save a lot of money by having all of their, if you think about how many people shop on Amazon, imagine if they also had to pay people from having a store and all of that there. They also benefit here. If you look closely, a lot of it is machinery going to collect the items. It's not always people who are doing the things. They've got this huge warehouse. So these are, and you couldn't have all this machinery moving around helping customers in a high street store, because there'd be huge risks of health and safety to customers and things like that. So this is a way that they're using technology in there. So fun facts: Uber is the world's largest taxi company, but it owns no vehicles. Facebook is the world's most popular social media network, but it creates no content. Alibaba is the world's most valuable retailer, but has no inventory. And Airbnb is the world's largest accommodation provider, but owns no hotels. So all of this is how technology has made these huge businesses, but they don't actually they own the technology. They don't actually own the product of the industry that they're in. So another interesting technology that's come up a lot in a lot of places is RFID tags. So RFID tags are a type of tracking system that uses radio frequency to search, identify, track, and communicate with items and people. Essentially, RFID tags are smart labels that can store a range of information from serial numbers to a short description and even pages of data. So that'll be even technology that when you see the security passes, they're all often RFID tags as well. But for example, if you've got lots of inventory, they all might have chips on it, so you know where things are going. So if you're shipping things out and all of a sudden a delivery goes missing, you can actually track where those deliveries are. If you've got stock cattle, often they might be wearing RFID tags on their ears, so that if people are stealing, your cattle or things like that, we know what's happening or things like that. Or if you've got sheep, you've got a farm and your sheep run away, you can use RFID tags to track them. Little things like that. Competing internationally, so changing the marketing mix. So the marketing mix obviously refers to product, price, place, and promotion. When they are trying to compete on an international scale, businesses have to adapt their marketing mix. This is because different countries have different beliefs, income levels, and levels of demand for each type of product. These differences affect each element of the marketing mix. Changes that a business might need to consider include product, styles, fashion trends, sizing, cultural beliefs, social colours that are considered lucky in one country may be associated with danger in another. So dietary requirements. So some places may require halal or kosher foods, and infrastructure. So right or left-hand drive cars and different types of electrical plugs. So these are the things that you need to consider working in a global marketing of what you might have to consider. So electric plugs is really important for electrical producers, and obviously car producers, different countries, different places, different things that need to be positioned. In price, that might be affected by tariffs and trading blocks, income levels and disposable income, tax, exchange rates, and level of demand. Place, so access to the internet in certain countries, purchasing preferences in some countries. So, for example, e-commerce may not be popular in some places, and distribution links in certain countries as well. Now, promotion, you need to be aware of cultural and social differences and language and translation. So that could be types of, you might say something in one country, but when you translate into a different language, it actually might be offensive, or you might have some countries that are more conservative. So in their marketing, you know, you might not be able to use the same marketing in different countries because it might be, you know, for example, can't think of an example off the top of my head, but, you know, the way that models might sell certain items or things like that. All right, practice question. So explain one drawback to a multinational of setting up a location in a foreign country. 3 marks. So it's just one BLT. Give that a go. All right, and let's continue. Last part of 2.1, growing the business. So 2.1.4 is ethics, the environment, and business. So the definition of business ethics is ideas about what is morally correct or not applied in a business situation. So what ethical decisions do they have to make? So production, you might have to think about of the amount of waste it produces and what does it do with the waste. Suppliers, how to treat suppliers and what it will buy. So fair trade, animal welfare. So you obviously want to be buying, if you're producing something or selling something, you want to make sure that your supplies are respectable, you know, kind to animals and so forth, not using slave labour. When it comes to workers, so their working conditions and pay, making sure that people are paid correctly, making sure that you're not using slave labour or anywhere in your production line. So in your customers, how much should they listen to customers and what they want? Do we care who our customers are? And would we sell to Burma, which has poor human rights standards, or arms dealers? So thinking about who your customers are and making sure that what the customers are going to do with the product that you sell them is going to be for ethical reasons. So competitors, how far to go in trying to win customers? So how much you're willing to undercut your competitors. So anti-competitive behaviours is also what we talk about. So, you know, are you going to bribe customers to buy from you? Is it ethical? So the product. So GM, genetically modified products. So sometimes we genetically modify foods and meats and things like that. So fast food with salt, sugar, and are there health issues? Are they ethically okay? The environment. So cutting waste, cutting energy, food miles. So when we talk about food miles, it's about how far food has to travel, like on the road, how much pollution to get things from one place to the other. And in your local communities, should businesses support the community where they operate? So business ethics is obviously not the law. Obviously, all businesses have to follow the law, and laws can change that make business have to follow. But this is about ethical. This is about more than what's right and what's wrong for a business. So how ethical are businesses working? So you've got them moving between high ethical standards and low ethical standards. So businesses tend to operate between them, between these two extremes. Most will ensure that they are staying within the law. Obviously, if they're outside of the law, they're going to find themselves in a lot of problems. So a lot of businesses will use their ethical standards as their marketing tools to talk about how much they're doing for the environment, or why, you know, you should buy products from them because they help such and things like that. So a lot of people will also use ethical standards just to sell more product as well. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with that. Other times, some people could ask, how ethical is that as well? So for example, you've got Marks and Spencer, Starbucks Coffee, and the Cooperative Bank at the higher end of the ethical standards. And then you've got Ryanair sitting a little bit at the lower end of the standards. And that could be because They, they don't give their customers a lot of things. They pollute a lot with their with all the jet fuel, whereas like some other airplane brands, airlines will also will carbon offset all of their flights and things like that. So they'll make other ethical decisions based on their pollution and things like that. So at the top of the scale, the ethical business, where ethical practice is at the core of the business. The responsive business accepts that being ethical can pay off. The legalistic business will obey the law, but no more than that. And the amoral business seeks to win at all costs, and anything is acceptable. So these are examples of ethical behaviour. So pressure groups, so organisations that support causes such as the environment, animal welfare, etc. They're all trying to get businesses to change what they're doing. So it's important to remember what pressure groups are, because you might see them as part of some of those questions. So do we have examples? So other examples of pressure groups will be like Greenpeace or different causes. So you might also have like community pressure groups who might like lobby local government or things like that to make certain changes, to make things better for the overall community and things like that. All right, so practice question here. So explain one benefit to a business of acting in an ethical manner. This is a 3-marker, so 1 BLT. Pause the video here. And let's push on. Okay, so we are now at the end of the video. So let's go through some of those sample answers. Remember, these are just guidelines. They're not, all of these questions have multiple answers the way you can argue, but you need to obviously remember your chain of analysis. You have to unpack your ideas and make sure it's all linked and makes sense. All right, so discuss the impact of growing internally. So this is a 6-marker. So one impact is that growth is slower than externally. This is because to grow, you have to convince more customers to buy the product, which takes time. Therefore, revenues and profits increase at a slower rate. A second impact is that internal growth is cheaper than external growth. This is because the business is growing gradually. This enables the business to keep costs low, allowing them to be more competitive in the market. This helps the growth to be successful. Next question. Discuss the impact on a business of financing growth using loan capital. So again, another 6-marker. One impact is that the owners will maintain control of the business. This is because the bank will not take a controlling interest. This will allow the original owners to continue to make all the decisions, therefore allowing the business to be run with the original owners' values. A second impact is that loan capital is more expensive than some sources. This is because the business will have to make repayments, which will include the interest payments. This increases fixed costs and therefore also increases total costs. This results in being harder to make a profit. So make sure we're always focusing on what the question is, answering the question. If they're talking about impact, if they're talking about method, if they're talking about advantage or disadvantage, make sure you're always answering the question. Explain one reason of the performance of a business can impact its aims and objectives. If a business is performing really well, then it may want to follow an objective of growth. This is because its current output may not be enough to meet the demand for the product. Therefore, by growing, they can increase capacity and make more sales. Explain one benefit to UK businesses from the rise in the number of imports entering the UK. One benefit is that UK manufacturers can import cheaper raw materials from abroad. Because this reduces the total cost of production, therefore allowing the business to sell the products at a lower price to have an increased profit margin. So some of these answers can be quite brief as long as you are unpacking your idea enough. So making sure you're making a valid point, and at the very minimum for a 3-marker that you're following up with 2 clearly linked answers as impacts from the reason that you're using. So another you could have done here is alternative is UK businesses may now be able to import products for resale that they couldn't get before. So that's another option that you could have argued for this one. Explain one drawback to a multinational of setting up a location in a foreign country. So one drawback is that a business may not fully understand the needs of the customers in the country where they are choosing to set up. As a result, the product may not be suitable if they do not adapt it. This means that customers may not buy the product, leading to financial trouble. So another alternative there is legislation may be different, so they may have to change the product. So explain one benefit to a business of acting in an ethical manner. So one benefit is that the business may gain a reputation for being an ethically minded company because customers may, because customers, sorry, this is me, I've typed it all out wrong, because customers may regard them more highly for this attribute and shop there, therefore potentially increasing their market share through word of mouth and positive association. All right, that's all. I will see you for our 2.2.